So as you can see, I am at home, and like many other through and section hikers, I have chosen to postpone my through hike. I got off in Franklin, North Carolina after doing the approach trail and then walking through mile 109, so about 120 miles total. Obviously, I'm extremely disappointed, but I wanted to talk a little bit about how I came to the decision and some questions that you can ask yourself if you're thinking about getting off trail as well. So in the last few days, the associations that manage the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, and the Continental Divide Trail have asked people if you're on trail to get off if possible or to postpone starting your hike. And along with that, they provided some guidance for those who are continuing on. So I want to talk a little bit about that. This is kind of unknown territory for all of us, and I think people are using abundance of caution because that is the best thing to do for all of our communities, even if it personally means sacrifices individually. And you know, I'm one of those people that rules exist for a reason, and it is always smart to critically think about those rules and challenge them when necessary. But I think people are taking the guidance that's given by the ATC as validation to continue their hike, and that is not what the guidance says. And I think you really need to critically look at whether or not it's right for you to continue. I also see a lot of judgment going around to those that are continuing their hikes, and there are reasons why that might be the safest thing for everybody. So I wanted to kind of go over how I came to my decision. I agonized over it. I did not want to come home. I was feeling great. I was learning new skills, and I kind of felt like I was getting into a groove out there. I'd been out there for 11 days, went into Franklin to take a zero. All my electronics had died, so I didn't really have a lot of access to news. And for probably 3 or 4 days, just kind of what I was hearing through the hiker gossip chain. And it was a really agonizing decision. I had a resupply box in Fontana. My goal was to resupply in Franklin, pick up my resupply box at Fontana Dam, and get to North Carolina, to Hot Springs, North Carolina, to reassess the situation. And ultimately I decided to get off trail in Franklin because I really kind of did a self-assessment on 5 things. So I wanted just to kind of go over what those are. So the first thing I asked myself was, how do I feel? Because if I have an injury and I'm really just trying to push through it, it didn't make sense to continue. So I felt great, but if you have an injury and you're still on trail, it's a win-win. Get off trail, rest up for a couple weeks, and then maybe you can get back out there. It might not be the hike you always envisioned, but it is a way to continue your hike still this year while resting up on your injuries. Second thing you should ask yourself is, do I have a place to live? A lot of the judgment I see about people who are staying on trail is they're staying on trail while they figure out their options. So some of the examples I've seen are, I sublet my apartment, I can't move back in, and I don't necessarily have family or support that I can move in with. If you live in, say, New York City, you can't just go move in with someone. There isn't space. The apartments are really small, and you don't necessarily have a place to go. So it's all chill on the judgment. You have to have a place to go. One of the other things I saw was I gave up my apartment. I put all my stuff in storage, and the most likely place for me to live kind of, I want to say long term, but really like 3 to 6 months while all this coronavirus stuff shakes out, is with my parents and live on the other side of the country. So all your stuff's in one place. You just have your backpack and your hiking gear, and your only option for kind of long-term living is with your parents, because you can't just go get an apartment if you don't have a job. You have to have proof of income typically. And so, for me, I had an easy, I own my own home. My husband thankfully took me back in after my 10 days away. So it was easy for me, and just remember it's not that easy for everybody else. And so there's some logistics that people have to figure out in terms of where to live if they do get off trail for 2 weeks, 2 months, or for the season. Oh, hello puppy, come here. This is the best part about coming home. Puppies. Hi, Bug. You want to say hi? Want to be on YouTube? Okay. Speaking of logistics, the other challenge is how do you get from point A to point B? So not everybody who is on trail can just jump in a rental car like I did and get home. So for me, it cost $43 and a tank of gas to drive from North Carolina to Ohio. I was home in 8 hours, really simple, and I can easily get back on trail in a couple weeks should the situation improve. Not everyone has that luxury. If you live clear across the country, you may not be able to get home, and coming to and from the trail would take up all the money you save to hike it this year. The other thing is there are a lot of people who live overseas who've come to the States to hike the trail, and they do not have a way home. They don't know what the situation is. So while they are trying to figure out how to get home, the safest place for them to be is on trail, not in a hostel with 20 bunks, everybody on top of each other. So they're trying to follow the ATC guidance where they figure out the logistics. So again, we all need to cool it with the judgment, because there are some extenuating circumstances where staying on trail is the best thing they can do, at least in the short term, while they figure out their options. So the fourth question I ask myself is, how would my hike be changed by limited services, resupply, and kind of the on-trail experience? And for me, I'm not racing to Katahdin. I want to make it all the way through, but if it takes me 7 months instead of 5 months, that's totally fine. I'm about the experience, not about kind of the how quick I can get there. But I did feel like when I got into Franklin, it was such a cute town, and I wanted to go out to dinner and have a drink and meet other hikers, and the vibe is just, it's worry. People have fear and concern, and it's valid because none of us have experienced this before, and we don't know what to do. And for me, the trail is about the experience. And if everything's closed and I'm only going into town to just, get a few groceries or a resupply box and take off, I'm not really getting the experience that I wanted. And the final and kind of most serious question you need to ask yourself is, are you willing to let someone else die so you can finish your through hike? And that may seem over the top and super dramatic, but again, I think an abundance of caution is really necessary here. So you have to weigh your impact on the world. What's the impact of going home versus what's the impact of staying on trail? Because at the end of the day, either thing you choose, you're going to come in contact with other people, and these smaller communities just don't have healthcare infrastructure to support an outbreak. And if we have an outbreak of norovirus in the bubble every year, thinking that we are not going to impact these communities by transmitting coronavirus, even though no one is doing it maliciously, no one's doing it intentionally, if we think that there's not going to be an impact, we're, I think, kicking ourselves. So it's good to see that leaders in the community are encouraging others to really think about what the safest thing to do. And I want to be clear, the safest thing may be for you to stay on trail. That may be the way that for you specifically are going to impact the least amount of people. But when I see things like don't be a sheep, don't quit your hike, that's really dangerous information. There's no one right decision, and no one can make this decision for you. But don't think that staying on trail does not have an impact, 'cause that is not true. After reviewing kind of these questions with myself, I realized that I can easily get to and from the trail. without taking public transportation, without negatively impacting people. My husband said he'd be willing to drive me back down to any point on the trail should I choose to get back on in a couple weeks or a couple months. And so for me, getting off was the right decision. And I took my resupply boxes in that I had planned and called those hostels and locations and said, hey, these have already been sent. I'm not on trail. Please transfer them to these hikers who do not have the ability to get off trail right now because they don't have a place to live and they don't have a way home yet. And that is the best thing I can do for right now. And so I think that, try to find solutions to help other hikers who maybe aren't in a position to get off trail right this minute. It's easy to say, hey, you can just come stay with me, but we don't know how long this is going to last. So, you have to really think about what is the long-term impact if I get off trail for 2 weeks and it turns into 6 months. And that might take people a couple weeks to figure out. So I'm, encouraging people to get off trail if they can. And hopefully we can all get back out there soon. Now, so one of the things that has disappointed me is there are some what I'm going to call influencers. They're not necessarily people who do this professionally like Darwin, Dixie, The Trek, etc. But they're people with lots of Instagram or YouTube followers. So they take free gear, they take free nights at hostels, etc. in exchange for promoting those items, and they're staying on trail because they want to get paid. And this is how it may not be their full-time job, but this is how they are supporting their hike. And I am disappointed to see that many of these people are staying on trail and perpetuating this idea that it's the safest place for them. Of course it's the safest place for them. It's not the safest place for everybody else, and that's the point. It isn't about you. And I think that's kind of the downside of our kind of social media culture. As much as I love Instagram and YouTube and consuming that kind of content and kind of connecting and relating with people that way, it does have a downside, and I think we're seeing it play out a little bit here. I want to talk about what some of our options are for later in the season should things improve. So I would love to continue where I left off in Franklin, North Carolina and do a traditional northbound hike. I chose a northbound hike for a reason because that's what I wanted and what was best for me. But if I don't get back out there in probably the next 3 weeks, I probably will not be able to finish in time. I'm not setting any land speed records. I am pokey. I got short legs. My dog keeps crying. He's very whiny today. Second option is really kind of that mid-April to late May. I could do a flip-flop. Flip-flopping does not necessarily give me the on-trail experience that I wanted, but this might actually be like the best year for a flip-flop, because if it does clear up by the end of May, and some of the restrictions and guidance is lifted or changed, and it is safe, not just for us, but for for the communities that we're going to come in contact with, to go back out. I think that would be, I think it just might be the best year ever for a flip-flop. So it could potentially kind of be a unique experience. You hear about the PCT, like, oh, it was a high snow year, or these fires happen, and it changes the experience on the PCT every year. This might be the AT's kind of like the year of the flip-flop where it's just really fun. Third option is go southbound, which scares the crap out of me. I learned so much in the first 11 days. But a southbound hike is no joke. This shit is hard. So I can work out and prepare as much as I can for the next 2 months, but once the flip-flop window is passed, then you have the southbound window. And if that doesn't work out and we're still kind of in this kind of dragging on of the virus, potentially picking a different long trail that's maybe a little bit shorter in August or September, so like the long trail in New England or the Tahoe Rim Trail was what I had originally planned to do this August. So maybe I'll get to do that after all. And then finally, the option is maybe I can do a thru hike close to home. So I live in Ohio, which is home to the Buckeye Trail. It's 1,400 miles or so. I know everybody's just heard tons about it. It's super famous. You're dying to do it. Not really. There's like a ton of road walks. It's not super exciting trail. However, I could potentially do that and never have to go into town for resupply. We live in Columbus and it's a big circle, this trail, and Columbus is right in the middle. So my husband could potentially drive an hour, maybe an hour and a half at most, and bring me the majority of my resupply. So I could actually do that hike and never go into town. Probably smell pretty bad. But there are some options, and so I encourage, you've planned a lot for the AT, but start planning some backup options so you have something to look forward to. And in the meantime, get outside as much as possible. I'm going to be walking around with my backpack every day, just trying to increase the weight and work on those trail legs. And whatever you decide, please just do it thoughtfully and with intention. And if you do those things, you can't make a wrong decision. So stay healthy and happy trails.